If you're an HVAC technician and a call comes in, Grainger knows that you need a partner that helps you find the right product, fast and hassle-free. And you know that when the first problem of the day is a clanking blower motor, there's no need to break a sweat. With Grainger's easy-to-use website and product details, you're confident you'll soon have everything humming right along. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 594, The Truscott Trot. Last time, though the overall Allied occupation of southern Sicily was going well, cracks began to appear between the Americans and the British. Monty, desperate to have his left flank protected, ordered the Canadians to use a highway in the American zone, thus disrupting their advance north. So, Patton, being Patton, and having achieved his initial orders, decided on a little payback. Well, actually, a lot of payback. He was determined to get to Messina before the British. With that goal in mind, Patton issued order to the two corps of his 7th Army and told C&C Alexander half-truths, which turns out delighted overall Commander Eisenhower, who actually wanted more American backbone to be displayed. To this, Patton said, "Yes, sir." Carrying out his orders from Patton, General Lucian Truscott ordered the 7th Infantry Regimental Combat Team to advance on Porto Empedocle along the coast to the northwest of Licata. The fastest way to get there was Highway 115 along the southern coast, but that road, as one approached the port city, was covered by the guns at the more northern and elevated town, Agrigento. Thus, Agrigento needed to be neutralized, which meant it could not receive any more reinforcements until it was attacked proper. So, the 2nd Battalion, 7th Regiment, or 2nd 7th, was sent to take a hill that covered the northern approach to Agrigento, while the 3rd Ranger Battalion was sent to cover the north-northwest of Agrigento. Now that the only routes into the town were covered, it was time to attack the town from the east. The Rangers moved out using a different highway, 112, to approach Agrigento. This was around 7 p.m., July 15th. Around midnight, they ran into an Italian roadblock. Taking 30 minutes to set up their attack, the Rangers came at the Italians hard from several locations. The defenders were quickly overwhelmed. The Americans soon held the road and had 165 Axis prisoners. This was too many to hold on to and still execute their orders. Thus, the Italians were marched back to the closest American-held town, Favara, which they passed through and handed them over to the 7th Infantry. Having lost the night to this necessity, the Rangers slept for a few hours, but by 6 a.m., they were back on the move. Coming in just north of Agrigento, the Rangers ran into another enemy position, this time a line of artillery. Dodging the shells, the Rangers engaged a nearby Italian motorized column of 10 motorcycles and 2 troop carriers protecting the artillery. Again, coming in hot, the Rangers neutralized many Italians. The last 40 of them, though, surrendered. And as during the first encounter, the Rangers suffered no killed or wounded of their own. But those Italian guns were not yet in their hands. Monteperto, just northwest of Agrigento, was entered by the Rangers at 8 a.m. They now controlled the valley leading to Porto Empedocle to the south. Their new position allowed them to better see the 4 Italian artillery batteries. Not wasting time, the Rangers got in close, using their mortars to tie down the enemy artillery, and when closer, let loose with their rifles. Having the Americans this close versus being far enough away to be able to take the time to shell them, some of the Italian crew ran to the south, but most of them raised their hands. The Rangers ordered them to climb up the hill to them. The Italians did and were made prisoner. Only then did the Rangers descend the hill and capture the command post and artillery. and in doing so, they suffered their only casualty in this operation, the commander of Company F, Lieutenant Campbell. He had led an attack on a machine gun position. With the area to the north of the port town in Allied hands, the Rangers moved south. A mile still shy of Porto Empedocle, the three companies of Rangers set up for their attack, which started at 2:20 p.m. The German troops in the city quickly realized that the attack was coming from the north, not the east, as they had anticipated. Rapidly shifting their defense to behind a cemetery wall to the north, they were too late. The Rangers came in from different angles, overwhelming the still building defense. It was all over by 4 p.m. Now controlling the land to the north and south of Agrigento, one battalion appeared to the town's north, which got the attention of the defenders, while a second battalion entered from the east before they could be stopped. By 3 a.m., July 17th, Agrigento was in American hands. With this done, it was time to move on to Palermo. And yet, C&C Alexander was starting to have second thoughts about giving Patton so much leeway. Did he feel the same about Monty? Who knows? But soon his headquarters was sending a message to Patton's office taking away what he had previously given: freedom of movement. The orders now read that Patton was to use the weight of the entire 7th Army to head north, not northwest, to make for the coast, to establish a north-south line. After this was done, Patton could then exploit the western end of the island, including Palermo. Clearly, this was a sop to the American general and the American soldiers, but Patton was past this point now. And Patton, like all leaders, had surrounded himself with like-minded men. When Patton's chief of staff, Brigadier General Hap Gay, received the signal from Alexander's headquarters, he hesitated, thought about it, and then replied that it was garbled and needed to be sent again. It was, but by that time Patton's troops were on their way, and a force underway was practically impossible to stop, given all the accompanying activity around it. To be fair to Patton, he did not know of any of this until later, despite what is shown in the George C. Scott movie. With Agrigento and Porto Empedocle now in American hands, Josh Force, which had captured Licata and its airfield, was dissolved, and from it 3rd Division now joined the Provisional Corps. Also joining this corps was a tabor, that is, a battalion-sized unit of Moroccan Gaumiers, indigenous Moroccan soldiers who had been working for the Free French. Now Provisional Corps headquarters ordered them to get on the road and to head for Palermo, which was 100 miles away, with little water en route, and Truscott wanted them there in 5 days. Of course, others would also be heading out, the 15th and 30th Infantry Regiments, with the 3rd Ranger Battalion leading the way. As the approaches to Palermo, not to mention the territory in between Porto Empedocle and Palermo, had to be de-axis-fied, Truscott's 3rd Division would take more than one road, spreading out. And about to get underway is the now famous Truscott Trot. Lieutenant General Lucian Truscott was 48 years old in 1943. A former cavalry officer, he had been a big part of developing an American commando unit. Based off the British commandos, he had been an observer in Mountbatten's horrendous Dieppe raid and firmly believed that the tougher he made his men through training, the better their chances were of getting home alive after the war. Thus, his 3rd Infantry Division was brought up to a very high standard. But Truscott's standard and the condition of his men was about to be tested. The 15th Regiment set off north, quickly passing Aragona. Resistance before them was uneven, and their speed, which we will get to later, simply undid the Italian defenders. Further north, a few bridges had been destroyed, but men also trained by Truscott made short work of this impediment as well. Meanwhile, the 30th Regiment went in a more northwesterly direction. They came across demolition work in their path as well, including a road along a cliff. No worry, the 10th Engineer Battalion soon had that passable by jeep, and that was enough for the 30th Regiment. For anything heavier the Americans might need later, that repair job was done in its entirety by midnight. Some terrain that they would cross rose to 4,000 feet, and there were plenty of possible ambush sites. Still, one battalion, the 3rd Battalion, 30th Regiment, marched 54 miles over mostly high ground to reach an even higher place just northeast of San Stefano in only 33 hours. San Stefano is almost halfway to Palermo. And because of the pace they set and the path they needed to take, no water in vehicles could be brought to them. And throwing in the Sicilian summer heat, this was an extraordinary achievement. Truscott had trained his men to march 5 miles per hour for the first mile. Then they were allowed to drop it down, if that's the correct phrase, to 4 miles an hour. They were to maintain that with full kit, which was more than the 2.5 miles per hour, the Army standard. Patton would say of Truscott after Sicily, "I know of no other major general who has more efficiently performed as a division commander." Of the 155 general officers, Patton rated Truscott in 5th place. With the 330th northeast of San Stefano, the 130th moved along Highway 118 to attack the town from the western side, and the 2nd 30th from the south. And when their artillery caught up, it was time to attack. The fighting started around 11:30 a.m., July 20th. By then, the 330th had moved from its northeast position to hit the town from the east. Closest to the town's edge was a reconnaissance platoon from 2nd Armored Division and 2 infantry platoons from the 30th. They were about 100 yards from entering the town, close to an Italian roadblock. There, 2 Italian artillery batteries were setting up. Again, the Axis defenders underestimated the speed of the 3rd Division. Seeing the Italians mid-set up, Colonel Rogers, the regimental commander of the 30th, had all their nearby weapons, small arms, machine guns, mortars, and rifles, open up simultaneously. Fairly jumping out of their skin, the Italian gunners and the 32 machine gun crews defending the larger guns dropped whatever needed dropping so they could run back into the town faster. With no nearby enemy units, the area to the east of San Stefano was cleared. Meanwhile, Rogers had his artillery fire on the road that led north out of the town. Sure enough, soon Italian and captured French vehicles were trying to use that very road to escape. Many were destroyed by the shelling. The 330th entered San Stefano at 5 p.m. Then came the 130th. Between them, they captured over 750 prisoners and more than 100 vehicles, still undamaged by the shelling. During this, and thinking of the larger objective, the 2nd 30th had already been ordered to head out towards Prizzi, to the northwest of San Stefano. Meanwhile, to the east of all this fighting, making up the American right flank, the 15th Infantry Regiment was moving through towns like Castelmini and Castro Nuovo by July 20th. The latter town is to the northeast of San Stefano. The 15th had met resistance, but like previous instances, the Italians were overwhelmed by the speed of the Americans. As General Nathan Bedford Forrest of the U.S. Civil War once supposedly said, "Get there first with the most men." And that's what the Americans were doing. With their right flank so covered, the 7th Infantry Regiment led the charge towards Palermo. On July 21st, the 2nd Battalion of the 7th Regiment captured the town of Prizzi, just past the halfway point to Palermo, and they captured the ridge behind the town at 9:30 a.m. Prizzi is just northwest of San Stefano, and Corleone is just northwest of Prizzi, and that was taken by the 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 7th Infantry Regiment. By 9 p.m. that same day, the regiment was reassembled to rest for mutual protection just north of Corleone. These men, due to their Truscott training, were in constant motion with very little sleep. After an hour's rest, the 2nd 7th was on the move along the highway, heading north-northeast towards Marineo, 10 miles shy of Palermo. Behind them was the 15th Infantry Regiment and the 4th Tabar of Gommier. By 3 a.m., now July 22nd, the 2nd 7th Regiment was 2 miles south of Marineo. It was at this point that the official order came down from Patton: make for Palermo. At this point, the men were still moving north because that's where the enemy was. Now that they had an honest-to-goodness destination, the men of the 7th Regiment actually picked up their pace. The 1/7th spelled the 2nd 7th, who then spelled the 3rd 7th later that day. This constant leapfrogging allowed the latter two battalions to travel at a slightly slower pace. That was their rest, and their artillery was actually keeping up with them. This drive kept the Italians that could constantly retreating before them. It was either that, it seemed, or become a prisoner, and some Italians chose this. Point is, the Axis were running out of real estate. In fact, they had already run out. At 2:45 p.m. that July 22nd, another order from Patton went out. It said, until further notice, no troops except patrols, i.e. vehicle patrols, were to cross a line 1 mile south of Palermo. For between the 7th Regiment shattering Italian defenses before them, the 7th Infantry motorized patrols had already passed the infantry on the roads and had reached the great port city. At 7 p.m., July 22nd, panicked, the civilian representatives of Palermo went out to meet the Americans in the form of Brigadier General William W. Eagles, the assistant divisional commander, and offered to surrender. But Patton had Eagles say no to this. He wasn't quite done. At 8:30 p.m., the 3/7th entered the town and secured vital installations. With this done, the infantry then went round and gathered up thousands of Italian and German prisoners. There was nowhere left for them to run to. Meanwhile, the men of the 15th and 30th Regiments cleared out the enemy positions around the town. And thinking they had done something, the Germans, by this time, had sunk 44 various-sized vessels in the port. But the American engineers, with Truscott watching them, would have this mostly cleaned up by the end of the week. Patton had achieved the first part of his revenge. He had the mighty port city of Palermo now to receive his supplies, and noticed that many Italians were glad the war was over for them. Some of the captured Italian troops stood and saluted when Patton drove by. Of course, he did note that the sanitation overall could have been better. Before taking over the Royal Palace as his new headquarters, he had it cleaned. In his estimation, this was the first cleaning it had gone through since the Greek occupation, that is, the mid-8th century BC. Patton was rightly proud of his men and himself. He would go on to say that the Provisional Corps had advanced faster against heavier resistance and across worse roads than the Germans with their blitzkrieg tactics. But what he forgot to mention was that Truscott's men had reached Palermo before his tanks did. The American who was not happy was 2nd Corps Commander Omar Bradley. He had been on the outside of Patton's tightly held plans to make for Palermo, until it was rather obvious. And when the Provisional Corps was on its way to the northwest, this left Bradley's 2nd Corps to fulfill Alexander's updated plans to drive solely north. First, Bradley's highway had been taken from him, and now he had to play good, obedient cop to Patton's bad but glamorous cop. For the American troops and the American people back home, they were delighted with Patton's taking of Palermo. It sounded important, after all, way back across the Atlantic. So while Patton chased glory, Bradley got on with driving north and having to take on German forces who would engage, ambush, and then pull away as they were racing to the Etna line now being created. It was ugly, bloody, and held absolutely no glory. After the war, Bradley wrote of these early days on Sicily. As touching Monty and the theft of his, Bradley's highway, Bradley wrote in his book, A General's Life, "I cannot leave this subject without calling attention to the sly way in which Monty described this infamous episode in his memoirs." He wrote, "The method by which the campaign would be developed once the armies were ashore and how the island would finally be reduced was not decided. In fact, there was no master plan." Continuing to quote Monty's memoirs, the 7th U.S. Army, once on shore, was allowed to wheel west towards Palermo. It thereby missed the opportunity to direct its main thrust northward in order to cut the island in two, as a preliminary to the encirclement of the Etna position and the capture of Messina, which of course was not true. But jumping ahead a bit to show that this was not a one-off on Monty's part, Bradley would go on to write, "Our task, that is, his drive to the north with only the 2nd Corps, was enlarged when Monty, without informing us, constricted General Lee's of the 30th Corps encirclement of Mount Etna and left it to us to take Etna. We were not informed of this abrupt change in plan. I fired off a testy letter to Lees, who apologized, quickly corrected the situation, and sent me 2 bottles of scotch, an atonement. On the heels of this exchange came a BBC broadcast crediting Lee's Canadian division with taking Etna. There is an exclamation point after this. Yes, Bradley was fighting hot, and not only at Monty. Still, Sicily needed to be wrapped up quick smart, and as much as he wanted to do his part, Bradley was about to have a front row seat in the next series of battles. For who would be claimed the conqueror of Sicily? Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I'd like to say a welcome aboard to the latest members. Let's see here. Tommy Thomason, thank you very much, Big Tom. I'm not sure if your family calls you that, but they should. And then there is Andrew Kairos from Cinnamon, I think, New Jersey. Sorry about that, Andrew. As far as those who have donated, Martin Robinson and Michael Bonner, who also became a member. So, Michael, that makes you my new best friend. So thank you very much to those supporting the show. And of course, there is Andrew Grossman, my executive producer from Astoria, New York. So so we've got Palermo, taken, and now it's time for Patton to drive east towards Messina. And of course, because of what Bradley has done, the first part of his journey is going to be relatively easy. It's in American hands. So again, he has thought this through. Patton pissed is a thing to behold, and he's not done yet. Take care, everyone.